There are names that never truly disappear. No matter how deeply they are buried, no matter how many years pass, they resurface, quietly, patiently, waiting for the right moment. Sometimes through a dream. Sometimes through a sound. And sometimes, through a name spoken on the evening news. On an ordinary morning in a crowded western city, a man stood in his kitchen watching the news without really watching it. The television was on, but his attention wasn't. Death had become routine. Accidents, overdoses, violent crimes, another statistic, another face briefly shown before being replaced by the next story. Until one name changed everything. The news anchor paused slightly before reading it. 38-year-old man was found dead in his apartment late last night. At first, the name meant nothing to the viewers at home. Just another stranger. But for one person listening, the sound of that name froze time itself. He was not a close friend. Not family. Not even someone important in the grand scheme of things. He was someone encountered briefly, and clashed with sharply. Just one day earlier. Witnesses later described a public argument. Raised voices. Tension. A moment where pride and anger collided. He was known for his temper, he never backed down, never let an insult pass unanswered. The confrontation ended without violence, but not without consequences. Because exactly 24 hours later, he was dead. Authorities reported no signs of forced entry. No struggle. No immediate explanation. The cause of death. A lethal dose of an unidentified substance. That single word, unidentified, changed the tone of the story. Investigators had no answers. No suspects. No clear motive. The case was labeled under investigation, a phrase often used when there is nothing solid to hold on to. But what the public didn't know was that this death wasn't isolated. Later that day, in a quiet apartment across the city, something else was discovered. An old notebook. Unused for months. Forgotten. Until it was opened by chance. On the page marked with yesterday's date, a single sentence had been written. Some people won't stop until they're dead. No context. No explanation. And then came the message. A phone vibrated. No caller ID. No history. Just 6 words on the screen. This was only the first. At that moment, the story stopped being about him. Because his death was not the conclusion of a conflict. It was the opening move of something far darker. Something methodical. Something personal. And something that was only just beginning. Before the deaths began, the man at the center of this story lived a life so ordinary that no one would ever remember it. He woke up at the same hour every morning, took the same route through the city, and blended into the crowd with practiced ease. He worked a job that paid just enough to survive and demanded just enough to exhaust him. Nothing about him stood out. No criminal record. No history of violence. No reputation that followed him through rooms. To his neighbors, he was quiet. To his co-workers, forgettable. To the city itself, invisible. And that invisibility mattered more than anyone realized. He lived alone in a modest apartment, the kind built decades earlier and never fully renovated. The walls were thin, the hallways narrow, the lighting always slightly too dim. Every sound echoed just a second longer than it should. At night, the building settled with slow creaks and distant thuds, as if it were breathing. His routine never changed. Morning coffee. Public transport. Work. Home. Occasional stops at the same convenience store, the same bar on Fridays, the same bench in the park where he sometimes sat without really looking at anything. He didn't seek trouble, and trouble didn't seek him. At least, not yet. What no one knew was that beneath that routine, something restless existed. Not anger. Not rage. Something quieter. A pressure. The kind that builds slowly over years, unnoticed, until it begins to leak into small moments. The first crack appeared on a weekday afternoon. It happened in a public place, crowded, loud, full of witnesses. A disagreement over something trivial. Words exchanged too quickly. A misunderstanding that should have ended with both sides walking away. But one man refused to walk away. It was him. He was the opposite of forgettable. Loud voice. Sharp tongue. A presence that demanded space. He thrived on confrontation, fed on the discomfort of others. People like him often mistake volume for power. Witnesses later recalled how he leaned forward, invading personal space. How his words cut deeper than necessary. How he smiled when he noticed the discomfort he was causing. The man said little. He tried to disengage. He tried to end it. He didn't allow that. The argument escalated just enough to draw attention. Just enough to humiliate. Just enough to leave a mark that couldn't be seen. Security intervened. The crowd dispersed. Life continued. But something had shifted. He walked away angry, convinced he had been wronged. Convinced he now had an enemy. He spoke about it to others later that day, exaggerating details, reshaping the story until he was the victim and the other man was the problem. That night, he slept believing the conflict was unfinished. He would never wake up again. 24 hours later, the city awoke to the news. He was found dead in his apartment. The report was brief. No signs of forced entry. No struggle. No immediate suspects. Toxicology pending. The phrase, unidentified substance, repeated across channels and articles. To the public, it was another unexplained death. To the man who had argued with him the day before, it was impossible to ignore. Investigators questioned him. Briefly. Professionally. They asked about the argument. About the nature of their relationship. About where he had been the night Karam died. His answers were simple. Verifiable. Clean. He was cleared just as quickly as he had been questioned. And yet, something lingered. He replayed the argument in his mind. Every word. Every look. The way Karam's voice rose. The way the crowd reacted. The way he himself had felt afterward, not angry, not afraid, but unsettled. That feeling grew when he saw the headline again the following morning. Same name. Same photo. Same unanswered questions. He tried to rationalize it. People die every day. Arguments don't cause death. Coincidence exists. But then came the detail no one else noticed. In the official timeline, he had died only hours after the argument. Sometime during the night. Quietly. Alone. Too soon. And then there was the notebook. It was old, its pages yellowed at the edges. He hadn't written in it for months. It sat untouched on a shelf, buried beneath papers and receipts. He didn't remember why he opened it that day. Habit, maybe. Or instinct. On the page marked with the date of the argument, a sentence had been written in his handwriting. Some people won't stop until they're dead. He stared at it longer than he should have. He didn't remember writing it. That disturbed him more than the words themselves. He closed the notebook and told himself it meant nothing. A stray thought. A moment of frustration put to paper and forgotten. But the city had already moved on. And the city was about to give him a second reason to pay attention. 5 days later, another death made the news. Different name. Different face. Different circumstances. But the connection was undeniable. This time, it was someone else who had crossed paths with him. Someone from his workplace. A man who had undermined him publicly during a meeting. Someone who had mocked him, dismissed him, made him the silent joke of the room. The man had left work furious that day, complaining loudly, making sure others knew where his anger was directed. 6 days later, he was found dead in his car. Carbon monoxide poisoning. Ruled an accident. The pattern had begun. The man watched the news in silence, his mind racing. 2 people. 2 conflicts. 2 deaths. Both close enough in time to feel wrong. Still, no one suspected him. Because there was nothing to suspect. And because whoever was doing this, if someone was doing this at all, was careful. That night, something new arrived. A letter. No return address. No name. Just his address typed cleanly on the envelope. Inside, a single page. 6 words. Do you see the pattern yet? He didn't call the police. He didn't tell anyone. He folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Deep down, a terrible thought had begun to form. What if this wasn't random? What if it wasn't coincidence? What if someone was watching him? Or worse. What if someone was listening to his thoughts? He slept poorly that night. And somewhere in the city, someone else was already marked. After the second death, the city did what cities always do. It explained things away. Accidents happened. People made mistakes. Lives ended quietly, without meaning. The news anchors spoke with calm voices, experts filled the gaps with theories, and within days, attention shifted elsewhere. But for him, nothing felt calm anymore. 2 people. 2 confrontations. 2 deaths. He stopped counting coincidence as an option. The third death occurred 6 days later. This time, the connection was weaker on paper, but stronger in reality. A man from a local bar. Someone who had mocked him openly one night, pushing past jokes into insults. Someone who had followed him outside just to have the last word. The argument hadn't escalated, but the intent had been clear: dominance, humiliation, control. 6 days later, that man was found at the bottom of a stairwell. Broken neck. Ruled a fall. The interval was impossible to ignore now. 6 days. He circled the date on his calendar with shaking hands. Not because he wanted to remember it, but because he was afraid of forgetting. Afraid that if he lost track, something worse would happen. That night, another letter arrived. Same envelope. Same typed address. No fingerprints. Inside, the message was longer. Anger is loud. Intent is quiet. You don't have to act. Others will do it for you. He read it 3 times. Others? His apartment no longer felt safe. Every creak of the building sounded intentional. Every passing car outside slowed just a little too much. He checked his locks twice. Then 3 times. Sleep became fragmented. Dreams blurred into waking thoughts. In those dreams, faces appeared, people he had argued with, people who had disrespected him, people who had made him feel small. And every face ended the same way, silent, motionless, gone. The 4th death came exactly 6 days later. This one shook the city. A woman. A professional. Someone respected. She had publicly accused him of misconduct at work weeks earlier. The accusation went nowhere, but the damage remained. Whispers followed him. Glances lingered. His reputation cracked. 6 days later, she was found dead in her home. Electrocution. A faulty appliance, they said. He vomited when he heard the news. This wasn't punishment anymore. This was precision. He stopped leaving his apartment unless necessary. When he did, he kept his head down, avoided eye contact, memorized exits. He began to believe the letters before they even arrived. The 5th death proved him right. Another man. Another conflict. Another 6-day gap. This time, it was someone he had nearly forgotten. A former neighbor who had threatened him during a dispute over noise. Shouting. Threats. Police called. No charges filed. 6 days later, that man was stabbed during a robbery. Wrong place. Wrong time. Wrong. The letter arrived before the news broke. "You're not cursed," it read. "You're chosen." His hands trembled so violently he dropped the paper. Chosen for what? The sixth death came like confirmation. A coworker. Passive-aggressive. Smiling insults. Subtle sabotage. Someone who never raised his voice but always twisted the knife slowly. 6 days later, a highway collision ended his life. High speed. Instant. No witnesses noticed the pattern. But he did. 6 days. 6 people. 6 different deaths. And every single one had one thing in common. Him. By now, he was convinced of only one thing. This wasn't about justice. This wasn't random. And this wasn't something human logic could explain. He began to believe he was cursed. Or worse. That something had attached itself to him. The letters continued. Always arriving after sunset. Always typed. Always knowing things they shouldn't. Things he hadn't said out loud. You think about them before it happens. You feel relief afterward. You don't have to deny it anymore. He stopped sleeping entirely. Mirrors became enemies. His own reflection felt unfamiliar, distorted. He avoided looking at himself too long, afraid he'd see someone else staring back. And then, on the 7th day, someone new crossed the line. A stranger on the street. A misunderstanding. A sharp word. The moment it happened, his blood ran cold. Because he knew the count had reset. 6 days. And somewhere nearby, another letter was already being written. By the time the 7th conflict occurred, he no longer reacted with anger. He reacted with fear. The argument itself was meaningless. A stranger brushing past him on the sidewalk. A muttered insult. A moment that, months earlier, would have dissolved into nothing. But now, the instant it happened, something inside him shut down. Because he knew the rules. 6 days. He didn't wait for the letter this time. He searched for it. Checked the mailbox before sunset. Opened it again after dark. Nothing. That silence felt louder than any threat. The following morning, he noticed the first sign that he was no longer alone. A car. Parked across the street. Dark windows. Engine off. It hadn't been there the night before. He told himself it was coincidence. Someone visiting. Someone waiting. But when he left for work, the car started. And when he turned the corner, it followed. Not closely. Not obviously. Just enough to stay within sight. By the time he reached his destination, the car was gone. The letters resumed that night. You're paying attention now. That's good. Awareness changes things. He stopped going out unless absolutely necessary. When he did, he took different routes. Walked through crowds. Entered stores he didn't need. Reflections in glass became checkpoints. Every face felt suspicious. Every sound felt deliberate. Sleep deprivation did the rest. After 3 nights without real rest, reality began to blur. Conversations echoed longer than they should. Time stretched, then snapped back suddenly. His thoughts stopped following lines and began circling themselves. That was when the first new enemy appeared. Someone from his past. A former colleague he hadn't seen in years. A chance encounter at a cafe. Small talk that turned sour. Old resentments resurfacing, sharpened by time. Accusations. Blame. Voices raised just enough to draw attention. The moment it ended, he felt sick. He went home and marked the date. 6 days later, that person was found dead in a hotel room. Drug overdose. Accidental. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He sat on the edge of his bed and waited for the letter. It came an hour later. One more to go. He didn't understand what that meant. Not yet. The second new conflict came from the last place he expected. A friend. One of the few people who still spoke to him regularly. Someone who had noticed the change. The paranoia. The exhaustion. The way he kept looking over his shoulder. The friend confronted him. Not aggressively. Not cruelly. With concern. But concern felt like accusation now. The conversation escalated. Words were misinterpreted. Silence filled the gaps with meaning that wasn't there. At some point, trust broke. And in his fractured mind, the unthinkable happened. The friend became a threat. The realization horrified him. He tried to undo it. Tried to apologize. Tried to call, to explain. The call went unanswered. The 6th day arrived too quickly. They met in public. He wanted witnesses. Safety. Normality. The friend agreed, still trying to help, still unaware of the invisible countdown hanging over them both. They never finished the conversation. It happened in seconds. A figure emerged from the crowd. A blur of motion. A sound like fabric tearing. Then a wet impact. The friend collapsed. Blood spread across the pavement. People screamed. Phones dropped. Someone shouted for help. He stood frozen, watching as life drained out of the only person who had tried to pull him back. The attacker was gone before anyone could react. No face. No direction. No weapon recovered. Just chaos. Police questioned everyone. Cameras were checked. No usable footage. The event became another unsolved act of violence in a city full of them. But he knew. This one was for him. That night, the letter arrived early. You're running out of excuses. You know who this is about. He began to unravel. He stopped eating. Stopped answering calls. Covered the mirrors in his apartment. The walls felt closer every day. He heard footsteps where there were none. Breathing behind doors he hadn't opened. Sometimes, he was certain someone was standing just outside his bedroom. Sometimes, he was sure it was inside. On the 5th night after the murder, he finally saw him. Not clearly. Not fully. A reflection in a window across the street. A silhouette where none should be. Tall. Still. Watching. When he turned, there was nothing. The final letter arrived at dawn. You've been chasing the wrong question. It's not who is killing them. It's why you wanted them gone. And for the first time, a thought formed that terrified him more than anything else. What if this wasn't punishment? What if this was fulfillment? What if someone else was doing what he never allowed himself to do? He didn't sleep after that. Because deep down, he knew the next step wasn't another letter. It was a meeting. The meeting happened without warning. No letter. No countdown. No explanation. One moment he was alone in his apartment, sitting on the edge of his bed, listening to the building breathe. The next, the lights flickered, not off, not on, just enough to make the shadows shift. And then he felt it. Presence. Not imagined. Not distant. Real. He stood slowly, every muscle tight, every sense stretched to its limit. The air felt heavier, thicker, as if the room itself were resisting movement. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. That was when a voice spoke. Not behind him. Not in front of him. Everywhere. You look worse than I expected. He spun around. Nothing. The room was empty. Door locked. Windows closed. No place to hide. His breathing became shallow. He backed toward the wall, eyes scanning, mind racing. This was it. The breaking point. Hallucination made flesh. Then. A shape emerged. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. It stepped forward as if it had been there the entire time, simply unnoticed. Tall. Calm. Familiar in a way that made his stomach twist. The face was wrong. Not unknown, worse. Recognizable. You're not real, he said. Or tried to. The words barely escaped his throat. The figure smiled. That's what you keep hoping. He lunged. Pure instinct. No thought. No plan. He threw himself forward, arms swinging, aiming for anything solid. His hands passed through empty air. Gone. The room snapped back into silence. 5 seconds passed. 10. He stood frozen, heart pounding so hard it hurt. Sweat ran down his back. He turned in a slow circle, checking every corner, every doorway. Nothing. A minute passed. Then 2. Then 5. 5 full minutes of nothing. No voice. No movement. No presence. He collapsed to his knees, gasping, laughter bubbling up uncontrollably. This was it. Complete psychological collapse. His mind had finally broken under the weight of fear and guilt and sleeplessness. And then a hand grabbed him from behind. Solid. Real. He screamed and twisted, slamming his elbow backward. It connected. The grip loosened. He rolled away, scrambling to his feet as the figure stepped fully into the light. This time, there was no doubt. He was real. They circled each other in the cramped apartment, furniture scraping, breath ragged. The figure moved with confidence, with purpose. No hesitation. No fear. You finally see me, the figure said calmly. Why? He shouted. Why are you doing this? The figure tilted his head. I'm not doing anything you didn't already want. He attacked again. This time, fists connected. Flesh met flesh. The impact was brutal, uncontrolled. Years of suppressed rage poured out in every strike. They crashed into walls, overturned chairs, shattered glass. The fight was messy, desperate, human. The figure fought back just as hard. Too hard. Like someone who knew exactly how far to push without killing. You think this is about them, the figure said between blows. It never was. He slammed the figure into the wall and grabbed the nearest object, metal, heavy, sharp-edged. Stop talking, he screamed. The figure didn't resist. He just looked at him. And that was when the truth hit. The face. The eyes. The familiarity he'd been running from. Memory flooded back all at once. Childhood. Shared rooms. Shared silence. Shared anger. His hands began to shake. No, he whispered. The figure nodded slowly. I tried to stop you, the figure said. But you needed to see what you were capable of. Something inside him snapped. He brought the object down. Once. Twice. Again. The figure collapsed. Silence returned, thick and suffocating. He stood there, staring at the body, chest heaving, mind empty. Police reports would later state the cause of death as blunt force trauma. What they wouldn't record was the scream that followed. The kind that comes from realizing the monster you've been chasing has always shared your blood. The figure lying on the floor wasn't a stranger. He was his brother. And with that realization, whatever remained of his sanity shattered completely. Hayes said he was unresponsive when they found him. Sitting on the floor. Hands covered in dried blood. Eyes open, but empty. He didn't resist arrest. He didn't speak. He didn't even seem aware that anyone else was in the room. The apartment told the story for him. Overturned furniture. Broken glass. Drag marks on the floor. And in the center of it all, the body. His brother. The media never learned the full details. Authorities kept the relationship out of public reports, labeling the incident a domestic homicide involving severe psychological distress. The case was closed quickly, quietly, efficiently. Because explaining it fully would have required answering a question no one wanted to ask. How many deaths had occurred before this one? He was declared mentally unfit to stand trial. Within weeks, he was transferred to a high-security psychiatric facility on the outskirts of the city. A place designed not to heal, but to contain. Long corridors. Locked doors. Windows that didn't open. Walls painted in colors meant to calm, but only succeeded in erasing time. They took everything from him. Shoelaces. Belts. Sharp objects. Privacy. Even his name was replaced with a number. The doctors diagnosed him with acute psychosis brought on by prolonged stress, sleep deprivation, and unresolved trauma. They said the brother had been a trigger. A projection. A final hallucination that ended in violence. They said the letters never existed. No envelopes were found. No fingerprints. No paper trail. According to the official story, he had imagined everything. At first, he accepted that. He spent his days staring at padded walls, his nights staring at the ceiling. Medication dulled his thoughts, slowed his reactions, wrapped his mind in thick fog. Time lost meaning. Days blended together until he couldn't tell how long he'd been there. But some things refused to disappear. Every night at exactly the same time, he heard footsteps outside his room. Not nurses. Not guards. These footsteps were slow. Deliberate. They stopped just outside his door. And then, silence. He told the doctors. They adjusted his medication. The footsteps continued. One night, he noticed something new. A piece of paper on the floor. Folded neatly. Slid under the door. His hands shook as he picked it up. Inside were 4 words, typed in familiar font. You finished my work. His breathing became shallow. He laughed. Then cried. Then laughed again. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. Security footage later showed no one approaching his room that night. Still, the notes continued. Not every day. Not on a schedule. Just often enough to remind him he wasn't alone. Weeks passed. Maybe months. Then came the incident. A routine check. A door left unlocked for exactly 12 seconds longer than protocol allowed. A moment of human error in a system built by humans. That was all it took. He walked out. Barefoot. Unnoticed. Alarms never sounded. Cameras glitched for reasons never fully explained. By the time staff realized he was missing, he was already gone. They found his room empty. Except for one thing. Written on the wall, scratched deep enough to bleed paint and plaster, were the words. I never wanted them dead. The search lasted 3 days. They never found him. Officially, he escaped during a psychotic episode and likely died shortly after, exposed and disoriented. Unofficially, rumors spread. People began noticing patterns again. Arguments followed by deaths. 6-day gaps. Different methods. No suspects. And occasionally, someone would receive a letter. Typed. Unsigned. Short. Pay attention to what you wish for. The last known footage connected to him surfaced months later. A grainy security video from a public place. A man standing still in a crowd, watching. His face partially obscured. Calm. Focused. For a brief moment, he looks directly into the camera. And smiles. The video cuts out immediately after. No one knows where he is now. No one knows if he's alive. But investigators agree on one thing. The pattern never stopped. It just changed hands. Because the most terrifying part of this story was never who committed the murders. It was the possibility that he never killed anyone at all. He just made sure someone else did.